You get paid, and for about 48 hours, maybe 72 if you're really disciplined, everything feels fine. The balance in your account actually looks like something. You breathe a little easier. You maybe treat yourself to a nice dinner, or you finally order that thing you've had sitting in your cart for 3 weeks. And then, almost without warning, the bills start hitting. Rent, car payment, insurance, subscriptions you forgot you had, a credit card minimum that somehow never seems to go down. And by the time you blink, you're back to watching your account the way you watch a pot that won't boil, anxious, helpless, vaguely frustrated with yourself. And here's the part that really gets to people. You have a job. Actually, a lot of people in this situation have two incomes coming in, either from a second job, a side hustle, or a dual income household, and they're still running on fumes by the second week of the month. That's the thing that doesn't make sense on paper. Two paychecks, reasonable income, and yet somehow still broke. I think about this constantly. My name is Emmy, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, not just the mechanics of it, but the psychology behind it, the invisible forces that shape why some people seem to quietly accumulate wealth over time, while others with identical incomes stay stuck, frustrated, and perpetually behind. And I want to talk about that today, not because I have some magic formula that erases financial stress overnight, but because I genuinely believe most people are fighting problems they haven't correctly identified yet, and you can't fix what you don't understand. So if you're sitting there thinking, I make decent money, why does it never feel like enough? Stay with me, because what we're about to get into might reframe the entire way you think about your financial situation. It's not really about what you earn, it's about something much more subtle, and honestly, much more fixable. Let's start with something that sounds almost too basic, but bear with me, because most people have genuinely never sat down and calculated what they actually bring home. You might know your salary, you might even know your hourly rate, but do you know your actual take-home pay after taxes, state taxes, Social Security, Medicare, and maybe a health insurance premium or a retirement contribution? A lot of people are working off a mental number that's somewhere between their gross income and their real net income, and that gap, that fuzzy middle ground, is where confusion starts. Here's a rough but common example. Someone earns $60,000 a year. That sounds like $5,000 a month, but after federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, Medicare, and maybe a health insurance premium or a retirement contribution, they might actually be taking home closer to $38,000 to $42,000 a year, which is somewhere between $3,100 and $3,500 a month. That's not $5,000. That's almost a $2,000 gap per month between what your brain thinks you make and what actually lands in your account. And then there's lifestyle creep, which is the very quiet, very sneaky thing that happens when your income goes up a little and your spending follows it almost automatically. You get a raise. Great. And somehow, within a few months, your spending has risen to meet it. New car payment, nicer apartment, more eating out, better vacations. It doesn't even feel like a choice in the moment. It just kind of happens. The takeaway here is simple but important. Before you can solve a money problem, you need accurate data, not a rough estimate, not a feeling. Sit down with your actual bank statements, your actual take-home pay, and actually reconcile what's coming in against what's going out. A lot of people avoid doing this because they're scared of what they'll find, but you cannot navigate without a map. Here's one that stings a little because it happens so gradually that most people genuinely don't see it until they're already in deep. Fixed costs, your rent or mortgage, car payments, insurance, subscriptions, loan minimums, these tend to grow over time in a way that feels painless in the moment and devastating in aggregate. Every individual decision made sense. You needed a reliable car, so you upgraded. You moved into a better apartment because you got that raise. You signed up for a few streaming services, a gym membership, a meal kit box, an app subscription here and there. Each one of these, individually, is completely reasonable, but stack them up, and you might be looking at fixed monthly obligations that consume 60, 70, even 80% of your take-home pay before you've bought a single grocery or put gas in that reliable car. The problem with fixed costs is that they're treated differently than variable spending. If you spend $40 on an impulse purchase, you feel it. You might even feel a little guilty. But your streaming subscriptions and your gym membership and your car payment, those happen automatically. They don't ping your emotional awareness the same way they spending. They're just there. Financial researchers actually have a name for this. It's sometimes called subscription blindness, or more broadly, the automation bias in spending. When something is set to autopay, it mentally exits the category of spending decisions in your brain. You stop thinking of it as money leaving, and that invisibility is exactly what makes it dangerous. The exercise I'd suggest, and this is a mildly tedious one, fair warning, is to list every single fixed or recurring charge that hits your account in a month, every one, and then, next to each one, write one of 3 words: essential, valuable, or habit. Essential means life literally doesn't function without it. Valuable means it genuinely improves your life in a meaningful way. Habit means you're keeping it mostly out of inertia. The habit ones are where you start.
Okay, so you've got your fixed costs figured out. You know what's coming in, you know what's automatically going out. But there's a third layer that doesn't show up as clearly, and this is honestly where most of the money goes. I call it gap spending. These are the purchases that happen in the spaces between your planned expenses. The coffee every morning, the lunch you didn't feel like packing, the random Amazon purchase at 11 p.m., the weekend outing that got a little out of hand, the bottle of wine, the movie, the convenience fee, the tip, the Uber because it was raining. None of these feel like decisions. They feel like life. And that's exactly the problem, because individually they're invisible, but cumulatively they're enormous. Here's a real illustration of how this works. 2 people earn the same income. One of them spends about $22 a day on what I'd call low awareness purchases, things they barely registered in the moment. That's roughly $660 a month. The other person isn't radically frugal, but they're slightly more intentional, maybe $15 a day on average. The difference is about $200 a month, which sounds modest, but over a year that's $2,400. Over a decade, if that difference is invested rather than spent, you're looking at potentially $30,000 to $40,000 in difference, depending on returns, from $22 versus $15 a day. The goal here isn't to cut out all the small pleasures. That's how people burn out and abandon any attempt at financial discipline entirely. The goal is awareness, specifically what behavioral economists call pre-commitment, making intentional choices about discretionary spending before you're in the moment, rather than deciding in real time when your willpower and judgment are both depleted. Practically, this looks like a weekly spending budget for variable expenses, one number tracked loosely. When you know you have, say, $300 for the week in discretionary spending, your brain makes decisions differently than when you're just swiping and hoping for the best. If you carry consumer debt, credit cards, personal loans, buy now, pay later balances, then you essentially have a second landlord, one who charges you every single month and never ever gives you equity in return. Let's be concrete about this. The average American carries somewhere around $5,000 to $6,000 in credit card debt, at an interest rate of 20 to 24%, which is fairly typical for standard credit cards in the current rate environment. You're paying somewhere between $80 and $120 a month in pure interest on that balance. Money that buys you nothing. Money that doesn't reduce your principal in any meaningful way if you're only making minimum payments. Money that is simply gone. And here's the thing that makes this so insidious. That $100 a month in interest isn't labeled waste anywhere. It shows up as a credit card payment, which feels like you're doing something responsible. You're paying your bills. Good for you.
but the minimum payment structure is specifically engineered to keep you in the cycle as long as possible. Paying the minimum on a $5,000 balance at 20% interest, making only the required payment, can take over 15 years to fully eliminate, and you'll have paid several $1,000s in interest on top of the original balance. Debt isn't just an inconvenience, it's a monthly tax on your past decisions, and the longer it exists, the more it costs you. The conventional wisdom here, and I think it's actually right, is to prioritize high-interest debt aggressively, not proportionally, not alongside everything else, aggressively. Because every dollar you pay toward a 20% interest balance gives you a guaranteed 20% return in the form of interest you no longer owe. There is almost no low-risk investment that reliably beats that. So before you're putting money into a taxable brokerage account, before you're thinking about complicated financial strategies, the boring, unglamorous work of eliminating high-interest consumer debt is almost always the highest return move available to you. Here's a pattern I see constantly. Someone has no real savings cushion, an unexpected expense hits, car repair, medical bill, appliance failure, and they put it on a credit card. Then they spend the next 6 months paying off that card. And just as they're getting close to cleared, something else comes up, and the cycle repeats. This isn't bad luck, this is a structural problem, and the structure is the absence of a properly funded emergency reserve. Most personal finance advice says 3 to 6 months of expenses. That's correct, and I'm not going to argue with it. But for someone just starting to build this cushion, that number can feel so overwhelming that they never start. 3 months of expenses might be $6, $8, $10,000. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, that feels almost fictional. So here's the reframe. Start with $1,000. That's your first milestone. $1,000 sitting in a separate savings account, not touched unless something is genuinely broken or genuinely necessary. That single buffer eliminates the majority of financial emergency scenarios. Most car repairs, most unexpected bills, most small crises, they fall below or around $1,000. And having that buffer means you don't reach for the credit card, which means you don't generate new high-interest debt, which means you're not stuck paying it off for 6 months. $1,000 isn't financial security, but it breaks the cycle. And once you have it, you build from there, slowly, consistently, until you've got a real cushion. The place to keep this money matters more than people realize, by the way. Not in your checking account, where it will quietly disappear into routine spending. Not in a physical place, in a dedicated savings account. Ideally one with a high-yield interest rate, because why not earn a little while it sits there, with some modest friction to access it. The friction is the point. If it takes 2 days to transfer the money, you'll think twice before treating it as spending money.
All right, this is the big one. And I want to say it plainly because I think it's the single most common reason two-income households are still financially stuck. Most people, when they get paid, pay everyone else first. Rent gets paid, utilities get paid, the car payment goes through, the subscriptions renew, the credit cards get their minimum, and then whatever is left, if anything is left, gets saved, or more commonly, it doesn't get saved because by the time all of that is done, there's nothing left to save, and the month repeats. This is called saving what's left, and it almost never works, not because people are irresponsible, but because human spending naturally expands to fill available money. If there's $400 left after bills and it's sitting in your checking account, the odds are strong that most of it finds somewhere to go. Life is expensive, needs are numerous, and the brain doesn't really distinguish between this is saved and this is just in my account. Paying yourself first inverts the entire model. Before anything else, before discretionary spending, before entertainment, before eating out, a fixed amount goes into savings or investment, automatically, on payday. It's not a decision you make each month, it's a system, and systems beat decisions every single time. If you make $4,000 a month and you auto-transfer $300 to savings on payday, you will, almost without noticing, adjust your spending to operate on $3,700. The money you never saw won't be missed the way you think it will, and at the end of the year, you have $3,600 saved, which might not sound life-changing, but it's $3,600 more than the version of you who was saving what was left. Start small enough that it doesn't hurt. $50 a paycheck, $100, whatever feels slightly uncomfortable but doable. Then increase it by a small amount every few months. The compounding here isn't just financial, it's behavioral. You are training yourself to live on less than you earn, and that habit, once established, is extraordinarily powerful. I want to spend a minute on something that doesn't come up enough in personal finance conversations, because it's not really about math, it's about psychology and environment. We live in a culture that is extraordinarily effective at making spending feel normal, aspirational, and low stakes. Social media alone has fundamentally altered what people perceive as a normal lifestyle. You see highlight reels of travel, restaurants, renovations, wardrobes, and experiences, and at some frequency, consciously or not, your brain updates its sense of what's standard. What used to feel like a luxury starts to feel like something you're missing out on, and that shift in baseline perception is enormously powerful. This isn't a moral failing, it's not weakness, it's the predictable result of being a social creature immersed in content that's specifically designed to stimulate desire and aspiration. Understanding this doesn't make you immune to it, but it does let you look at your spending choices with a slightly more critical eye. When you feel the pull towards something, it's worth asking whether you actually want this thing or whether you've just been shown it repeatedly until wanting it felt natural. Your peer group also matters more than most people acknowledge. Research consistently finds that spending patterns are heavily shaped by the norms of your immediate social circle. Not because people are deliberately keeping up with the Joneses, most would deny it strongly, but because social contexts create spending contexts. If your friends default to expensive dinners, if every group hangout involves significant spending, if the culture of your relationships equates experiences with dollar amounts, that shapes your financial life in real and measurable ways. None of this means you need to isolate yourself or become a hermit. It means being conscious of the environments you're in, the content you consume, and the narratives you absorb about what a good life looks like and what it costs. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this. Building wealth doesn't look like a dramatic transformation. It doesn't happen because of one brilliant financial move. It happens through consistent, boring, repeated choices made over a long period of time. It looks like knowing your real take-home pay. It looks like having an honest accounting of your fixed costs and identifying which ones are actually justified. It looks like a modest weekly budget for discretionary spending and a habit of checking in with it. It looks like an emergency fund that grows slowly but stays intact. It looks like aggressive but patient progress on high-interest debt. It looks like a modest but automatic savings contribution that increases a little each year. None of those things are exciting. None of them make for good social media content. But in aggregate, over time, they represent the actual mechanism by which ordinary people, people with normal incomes, without inheritances or windfalls, build genuine financial stability. The comparison that comes to mind is exercise. The people who are actually in great shape aren't doing the most extreme workouts. They're doing consistent, moderate exercise with good habits over years. The flashy stuff rarely wins. The boring, sustainable stuff does. So, 2 paychecks, still broke. Let's bring this full circle. If you've been frustrated by the gap between what you earn and how your finances actually feel, I want you to know that the problem almost certainly isn't that you're not earning enough. It's that the system you're living inside, the automatic charges, the creeping lifestyle, the gap spending, the debt carrying interest every month, and the absence of a real saving structure was never designed to help you get ahead. It was designed by other people for other purposes, and you inherited it mostly by default.
What changes things is awareness, clear, honest, number-by-number awareness of what's actually happening with your money, and then, very deliberately, building a different system, one where savings happen first, where fixed costs are regularly audited, where debt is treated with urgency, where your financial life is something you're operating with intention rather than just surviving through. This doesn't require a perfect salary. It doesn't require financial genius. It requires willingness to look honestly at the current picture and make some deliberate, quiet changes, small ones that compound. If you walked away today feeling like you understand the problem a little more clearly, like the picture of why you're stuck has come into slightly sharper focus, then that's the start. That clarity is worth something, because now you're not fighting ghosts. You know what you're actually dealing with, and that, genuinely, is where it starts.